Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Elena. Subscribe down below if you like content related to fashion and styling, reading, or if you just like little adventures and vlogs. In today's video, I am going to be discussing my favorite books of all time. While these are my favorite books of all time, it's not necessarily every single one of my favorite books of all time. It is more so my favorite books of all time that I currently own and possess and are on my bookshelf, because there are a few books that I have absolutely loved and I would love to reread again that I do not have in my possession for God only knows what reason. So what makes a book a favorite of all time in Elena's world? Well, a favorite book of all time for me would mean one that every single thing about it I loved. There were no complaints. I finished it, wanted to reread it immediately again, thought about it constantly for weeks. Think about it years later. Books I have reread so many times it's sickening. A book, for example, that I couldn't put down, like I literally could have finished in one sitting. And yeah, that constitutes what makes it my favorite book of all time. Before I begin, I do have a bookshelf tour. I filmed it months and months ago. It's on my channel. You can check it out. Awesome. The first one is called What's Mine and Yours. This book I actually got at this place called the Book Barn in my state of Connecticut. If you're ever here or if you live here, it's in the town of Niantic. It's like all these sheds and barns with just, can't even fathom how many books. Never heard of this book, never seen this book in my life. I read the inscription and I was like, yeah, mom's going home with it. Basically about these two characters. It goes into their childhood, but it mostly focuses on them as teenagers and then also as them as adults. They are an interracial couple, so in the book it kind of goes over their struggle with how their families think of one another and just things that they've gone through just based on where they live and racism that they've had to deal with. Do read a good chunk of romance books from various authors, and this I think was one that was just more in depth. What I loved so much about it, one, the way the author wrote. It wasn't like a hard read, but it was more deep and meaningful to me with the words and the writing style written with, I feel like, a lot more emotion in it. The backgrounds and stories of the characters and their romance together, I just felt like it was just a very good story. I feel like this doesn't get the recognition it deserves from what I've seen, and what I've seen is no one has ever talked about it. Girlchild. This is also another book that I got at the Book Barn. This book is a fictional book. It's based on a young girl who, it kind of goes through her life into her, I think her mid-teens. So I think it ends when she's about 16, and I think it starts when maybe she's like 5 or 6. So it kind of spans a decade, but she essentially lives outside of Las Vegas. I think it was in Reno, Nevada with her mom in a trailer park. And she's very poor. She's quite abused. She's very neglected, not protected in any way, fed to the wolves essentially. And it is very sad, but the way it's written and formatted is just so like stunning and poetic. Like, for example, the chapters are short, so like most chapters are a page or a couple pages, right? But there's some chapters that are formatted in a very poetic way. So for example, or a way that's supposed to convey something more to the reader about what's going on in the book. For example, there's an incident that happens between her as a young child. It's very jarring and disgusting, and it's true to life, sadly. But the way they talk about what happens in the chapter is this. The first sentence says, "Here's how the hardware man makes the lights go out." And then it's all just that. Is written or formatted in such a way that kind of resembles what her mind as a child, the fictional character, make what's happening to her, what's happening around her makes, hey, such a good book. I loved it so much I couldn't put it down. The Sugar Queen. The Sugar Queen is by Addison. I would say this has to be regarded as my favorite book of all time, solely based on how many times I've read it. I also have, I think, every single book she's written except for one she co-wrote. Romance, fictional romance. I cannot recommend an author enough. I think if you love the movie Practical Magic, then you need to read Addison books. It's fictional romance mixed with just a sparkle of magic. Always set in North Carolina, I think some in South Carolina. This one is basically about an heir in a town. She's like an heir to like a big, I think her like father pretty much established the town in the ski slope, so she's kind of the heir to that. But her mother and her do not get along at all. Her mother has a lot of resentment towards her, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that she's just spitting image of her father, who would abuse the mother. Two women mad at each other and how they're not happy in their own lives, and basically by the end of the book, it's kind of like an enough is enough scenario. She finds love in this book. She's kind of a loner. She was known as a spoiled child growing up, and she would throw tantrums, but it was mostly because she was very ignored by her mother and she didn't get proper love and attention, and her mother just like couldn't stand her pretty much from the day she was born. And it just kind of goes on how she changed so much as an adult, but no one wants to accept that. The next one is We Run the Tides, is one that I saw at a bookstore. I saw the artwork. I judged a book by its cover and I was right. Now, it's not really a romance, may I add, and it's basically set in the very early 80s in San Francisco, and it's about two best friends. The main character, or the narrator, it's Yolabi. She has a friend named Maria who's just this like magnetic person. I think they're in like 7th or 8th grade. Everyone loves her. All the guys think she's just so pretty. She gets all the attention. She's perfect. She's rich, whatever. But she's kind of hiding some stuff. She's a shady person. She's a shady friend. She's not a very well-intentioned person. But Maria goes missing, and the whole time her friend, the narrator, just knows she's lying. There's just something really captivating about this book. It wasn't like really the way it was, it might have been the way it was written, but I think it was just like the setting that it was in and the year, and just how the characters acted, and just the personalities, and just the story. It just wasn't really anything I was reading at the time, so I loved it and I couldn't put it down. We have Family of Liars. I used to own We Were Liars, and that was one of my favorite books of all time. Before I get into this, if you read this book, you need to read We Were Liars first. This is a prequel, but there's a lot of things that happen in the first book, aka the sequel technically, We Were Liars, that is given away in this book. So you need to read We Were Liars and then need to read Family of Liars. It's about the Sinclair family in both books, but this one is about the Sinclair sisters when they were teenagers, whereas in We Were Liars, it's about them as adults and their children. The narrator for this one, I think it's actually the oldest sister, and it's Caroline. So there's Caroline, Penelope, Elizabeth, and then Rosemary, which you'll find out about Rosemary in this book, about the dynamics between them, the dynamics with them and their parents. There's a lot of drama involved. There may or may not be a death / murder. I don't know, read it, you'll figure it out. It's a very interesting book. I really like Lockhart's writing style in We Were Liars and Family of Liars. To 2 books by Little Miss Emily Henry. Happy Place, which is the newest one that came out this April. It's my favorite one actually, and People We Meet on Vacation. Now, if you've never read Emily Henry, I highly suggest her in the sense that it is fictional romance, but just the way she writes, it's nothing like revolutionary. It's not like it's like, oh my god. It's just like very smooth and simple and easy reads. It's simply just entertaining. These 2 were like ones I cannot wait to read again. This is Lovers to Enemies to Lovers. This one is Friends to Lovers, and I love a Friends to Lovers. This one is about 2 friends who meet in college, and they're very opposite of each other, but they constantly go on vacations together like once a year. This one I really liked. I liked the way, I just like the setting of it. It was set in Maine in the summer, and I loved all the different friends they had in it, and the friendships and the dynamics, and I just loved this one so much. There was just something about Happy Place that I think was truly her best. Coast to Coast Ghosts. True stories of hauntings across America. I personally do, to an extent, believe in the paranormal. I could not stop reading it, and I kept rereading it, and oftentimes I'll grab it and flick through and read a few of the stories. It's very captivating in the way she writes the stories and explains what happens. Dancing with the Octopus. Now, this is a true crime story, and it's a memoir of a crime by Debora Harding. This book was really interesting. I couldn't put it down. Kind of details most of her life, but it's mainly focused on the effects of her getting kidnapped in 1978 at the age of 14, into prior to her kidnapping, what her family dynamic and relationship was like, especially with her parents and especially with her mom. How her kidnapping and everything that happened to her, how it impacted her relationship with her family, and what ended up happening well into her adulthood and into her present day. The Babysitter. The narrator of this is Liza Rodman. That's her right there as a young girl, and it's basically about her summers with a serial killer. She grew up in Massachusetts, and a lot of the summers her mom would either move her or they would end up living in Cape Cod. Her mom is quite neglectful, quite abusive, not a good person, and she has a younger sister, and basically each like summer her mom gets a new like job as a maid at a hotel. She ends up owning one of the hotels, so on and so forth. So they spend a lot of summers at the Cape, either in like Truro, P-Town, that whole area. They end up getting babysat by Tony Costa. He was like the janitor of one of the hotels, so oftentimes the mother would be like, can you take them, and for numerous summers he would like just grab him when he was doing errands and stuff. You find out some of the errands or things he was doing was crime. Very horrific what he did to his victims. Just her experience with him and what she didn't realize was going on as a child, what no one realized. It was a very interesting read. I just like the way she highlights and raises awareness to what happened to these young women and his victims, and the research into finding the ones who disappeared without a trace. Last but not least, we have I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. Now, this book was like highly recommended to everyone. I feel like no matter where you looked, people were recommending this book, and I heard it was so good. And obviously it was, because it's the last book I'm discussing in my favorite books of all time. First off, something about pink and yellow. Debbie Pastels. This is by Jennette McCurdy. If you don't know who Jennette McCurdy is, she played Sam in the show iCarly. It is about her life as a child star. Was very abused by her mother in the sense that she was forced to act at a very young age. All the money was given to the family. Her mother had a lot of issues on her own. Her mother mistreated her, but then her mother would guilt her a lot and manipulate her. So weird to think back and be like, oh my gosh, she was going through that. Like, there are times where she explains an event that happened, and she explains like, well, this happened on iCarly for this episode and this and this, and you can YouTube that episode and be like, oh my god. Quite sad. There is a happy ending because she's good and she's well and she's okay now. It just really highlights the abuse children go through within the TV and film industry. And that concludes. So I really hope you enjoyed that video. So definitely shoot in the comments if you have a book rec that's one of your favorite books of all time that I did not mention. Definitely check out some of the books I mentioned if you have not read them. And if you do read them, I hope you like them and I hope you love them and cherish them as much as I do. That's it for this video, and I will catch you in my next one. Bye.